One day this summer, my mom, who turned 88 in October, suggested that we drive to Toledo and visit the houses that we lived in when we were there. My mother and my older brother were born in Akron, Ohio, but my dad and my younger brother and sister and I were all born in Toledo, Ohio. And so on a beautiful mid-September morning, my mom and my brother drove over from Indiana. My younger brother Dan and I drove down from Detroit. And this was the house that we moved into 15 days after I was born. This is how the house looked 64 years ago when we bought it. My younger brother and sister were born while we lived in this house. Here's a picture of my first birthday party. I'm the one in the little rocker there. My older brother's in the chair. My mother is pregnant with my sister. The porch swing is still there. My older brother and I, and my sister is here sitting in my mom's lap. She's probably about a year old in this picture. Here's another birthday party in the backyard. My youngest brother Dan was born by then, so all three of us boys and probably all the other boys in the neighborhood were at this party, and we all had cowboy gear. Here's a picture of the four of us on the front steps of that house, all dressed up in our Easter clothes. I never saw this picture until 2 years ago when I was going through my father's old slides. Here we are inside the house in the kitchen with my dad carving the Halloween pumpkin. My father was an engineer, so pumpkin carving was a very serious business. In going back to see our houses and remembering all these moments, I realized that I'm not remembering something in the past. All these people are still present to me, even though some of them have already died. This week, Pope Francis reminded us that evolution is part of the creative process. Well, this isn't really news for Catholics, but some people were surprised to hear him say this. But we understand that creation is not a past event, as if, God created, past tense, but rather that God is creating. God isn't finished with us yet. The future continues to evolve just as creation has always been evolving. The Irish physicist and priest, Father Diarmuid O'Murhu, writes that creation is our true, authentic home, the household of all life, including those who have gone before us. The afterlife does not exist outside creation, but within it, a realm in which our departed loved ones inhabit a different level of being within the one cosmos. It's easy to forget this, especially when we are grieving the death of a loved one. Grief has the capacity to completely overwhelm us. In the book of Lamentations, which is the only book in the Bible named for an emotion, you can hear the language that's filled with deep pain. The children of Israel are in exile. Their temple has been destroyed. All that they know is abandonment and loss. What if God has utterly rejected us? This would be not only the death of us, but the death of God. Can that be what is faced by those hunkered down in the destroyed city of God? I remember Dr. Joyce Brothers once remarking, after the death of her husband, she said, "I know that life is worth living, but for the moment, I just can't remember why." One might ask the poet of Lamentations, what is the sense of prayer at all? Given the outburst a few verses after our text, you have wrapped yourself in a cloud so that no prayer can pass through. Indeed, things fall apart, even the possibility of prayer. But we've heard this kind of thing before. In Psalm 23, the psalmist prays, "Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are at my side." We cannot understand the significance of the words of hope in the psalm, "The Lord is my shepherd," if we do not hear them uttered in the midst of the darkest valley. Only when we can give voice to this darkness can we hear something new. And then the poet remembers, The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. The Lord is good to those who wait for him. But it can be a very long wait. We must admit there will be times when it appears that all is lost. But then, this voice, the Lord is good to those who wait for him. Hold on to this for me. Believe it with me. Let me hear it anew. Faith will be holding on to the gift once given, despite whatever present realities call it into question. As for the poet in Lamentations, such faith will require the creedal and communal memory of what God has done, calling that work into the present through prayer and proclamation. If it takes a village to raise a child, it will certainly take a congregation to support or restore my faith, to recite it to me in the creed, to proclaim it to me in the sermon, to sing it to me in the liturgy and hymns. Karl Rahner, the Jesuit theologian, priest, reflecting on our relationship within the community of saints, wrote, "As regards to our salvation, we remain dependent on other human beings. This is perfectly obvious, and yet still very difficult to grasp. One might think we are important only for life here and now, or for external things, or at most as regards to the earthly life of the mind. One might think, when it comes to how God stands to me and I stand to God, when we are dealing with the final decision about eternity, when we are dealing with how I ultimately come through, when I'm completely isolated before the face of God, by the remorseless loneliness of my death, then for this question, I am one who's completely on my own, left to myself. Then there will remain only God alone and me, God's heart, God's mercy, and my individual freedom of a guilt and a grace that are unavoidably my own. And yet, it is not like this. Everything said above is true, but it's not the whole truth. The whole truth is this: even then, we are still part of each other. All persons have their own inalienable, once and for all freedom. But yet this does not mean that this freedom is an isolated freedom, not even when it is deciding the eternal fate of a human being. In nature and in grace, therefore, existence is a reality in common. This works itself out in a shared reality of sin and guilt, a shared reality of God's mercy and God's grace, a shared reality of origin and goal. But guilt and grace, beginning and ends, are matters for God. And therefore this human reality in common extends into the sphere of human salvation before God. Human beings are in a communion of salvation and its opposites. Ron Rolheiser recalls a friend commenting on the love he experienced in certain friendships. And he said, "If I died today, what would be clearest on my mind as I say goodbye to this life is that I'd leave knowing for certain I'm loved. Given this wonderful grace, how could he possibly choose against love after his death? The love we experience from each other on this earth will no doubt greatly sway our choice when we stand alone before God and have to choose between love and its opposite for all eternity." Jesus' promise in the gospel affirms this truth. "And this is the will of him who sent me, that I should lose nothing of all that he has given me." God never gives up on us. God eternally calls. In the vigil for the deceased at the funeral home, we begin the prayer with these words: "Brothers and sisters, we believe that all the ties of friendship and affection, which knit us together as one, do not unravel with death. This is as true for us as it is for those who have died. We are not done with the dead. The Catholic concept of purgatory reminds us that life and love continue to grow even after death. Our relationships with our loved ones continue to evolve. The Irish poet and priest John O'Donoghue wrote, "We look toward each other no longer from the old distance of our names. Now you dwell inside the rhythm of breath, as close to us as we are to ourselves. Though we cannot see you with outward eyes, we know our soul's gaze is upon your face, smiling back at us from within everything, to which we bring our best refinement. Let us not look for you only in memory, where we would grow lonely without you. You would want us to find you in presence, beside us when beauty brightens, when kindness glows and music echoes eternal tones, when orchids brighten the earth, darkest winter has turned to spring. May this dark grief flower with hope in every heart that loves you. May you continue to inspire us to enter each day with a generous heart, to serve the call of courage and love until we see your beautiful face again in that land where there is no more separation, where all tears will be wiped from our eyes, and where we will never lose you again."